Let's check in with Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine.
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
We have Joseph with us now. Joe, I was talking earlier about the prisoner exchange, and is that the cause for optimism in other areas there?
Bob, good afternoon from Lviv. I would say no. These have happened before. It's been a few months since there has been a major exchange. Notably, as we look, we look at the exchanges between the hostages taken by Hamas and Israeli, the Palestinian prisoners in Israel, and it's a similar thing here. Russia got more people than Ukraine did, in the same way that Hamas got more people than Israel did. Which is interesting. And you sort of see who has sometimes, I guess, in some sense, the upper hand in these negotiations. Russia only got a few more, but it still is notable. And, when we hear of these exchanges, some of these Ukrainians who were finally released, they've been in Russian captivity since the very beginning of the full-scale invasion. Several of those of the Coast Guard members from Snake Island, that island that the Russians captured early on with those prisoners who refused to concede the island, those Ukrainians, they've been in captivity this entire time. I remember several months ago when I was in the coastal region of Bessarabia, I met a woman whose husband was one of those Snake Island prisoners, and she'd only been able to speak with him once since February of 2022. I do not know if he was one of the ones who was released. There also were people who were working at Chernobyl, the nuclear plant, or the former nuclear plant, and they were just finally released. And it was interesting timing because I also heard recently from a British veteran who was fighting in Ukraine, and he was taken by the Russians, and he was sentenced to death by the Russian puppet government in the Donetsk region, and he was released sort of at the last minute, and he was talking recently about the trauma he went through as he returned to life after that. But we have so many accounts of how the Russians have tortured. There's no following of Geneva Conventions and the way they've tortured prisoners, and it's been pretty hellish. Meanwhile, as we speak right now, just about an hour ago, Russian missiles were going to a couple cities in south central Ukraine, Kryvyi and Kropotivsky. And last night, once again, two missiles hit the city of Kharkiv. Kharkiv has been so heavily bombarded since last Thursday. So two missiles is, in a way, it's a quiet night in Kharkiv. But as I look at the images from that city, so much of that city of Kharkiv, 30 miles from Russia, was coming back to life the past 6-8 months. And, I was there on February 24th of last year, of 2023. And from that day on, the city, something changed in the city because everyone thought that day Russia was going to do something major, and they didn't. And so people were moving back. They were moving their families back to the city, opening cafes and shops. And now so many blocks of that city are devastated once again.
I was talking earlier about the power outages in the wintertime, but the latest missile attacks on Ukraine seem to indicate Russia is targeting the defense industry rather than energy infrastructure, Joe.
Yeah, for sure, we know that the energy infrastructure is working. As I've said before, last year it was like we were in the Middle Ages here. Students had to do their homework by candlelight. As I travel around to different Ukrainian cities, and like here in Lviv now, almost every shop or restaurant you go to has a generator at the ready, but no one has had to use them this winter. So Ukraine is very prepared. Perhaps the Russians realize that Ukrainians don't care if they're freezing; they're not going to surrender. But I think also the infrastructure is better protected. That had been such a concern. That would be a major target of the Russians, but it's not been. And certainly, we see it's a delicate thing. But of course, the Russians are trying to destroy the stockpile of weapons from the West. Of course, this is what they need to do in order to stop Ukraine, and in order to discourage the West from sending more weapons. And so this goes back to the question of, as we've seen, like, what was it on New Year's Day January 2nd, there were, among all the missiles that hit Kyiv, it seems that 10 of those missiles were the hypersonic Kinzhal missiles, which can only be stopped by the Patriot missile battery from the U.S. And so, and the Patriot missile battery, you can move around. And so, of course, the Russians are trying to find it and to take out things like that so that Ukraine is unprotected. But so far, Ukraine, has really been able to protect, especially Kyiv. And so Kharkiv is a different story. There's no Patriot missile battery for Kharkiv. Nothing has been sent from the West. That is really unfortunate because Kharkiv is so close to Russia. It's very easy for Russia to attack that city. And so this is the not only does Ukraine need to be supplied with air defense, but then, of course, Ukraine needs the ability to hit bases in Russia. And this is something that, I just saw a report from Ukrainska Pravda, independent media in Kyiv, talking about when Ukrainians hit a Russian ship back in August, and they used a sea drone to destroy a ship. It killed a number of Russian sailors, and it was a very important part of the Russian Navy. And the end of the story noted that Ukraine's international partners, it didn't say who they were, but that according to sources, were not happy with Ukraine, that they attacked that Russian ship. And, as long as Ukraine doesn't have that ability to respond, it's going to be extremely difficult. And, I was just speaking with an American who just arrived in Lviv, and he was in Kyiv during that January 2nd attack with 20 missiles in one day. And I said, how was it? And he said, well, after the first few missiles, you just kind of get used to it. And he said he just started to, write some stories and write some songs. And this is how people, meanwhile, are getting by. I heard the story also of a Ukrainian soldier. He was on a brief leave for the holidays, and he came back to Lviv, and he really wanted to live a normal life for just a few days. So just imagine you're in sort of the rat-infested trenches with the artillery fire, and it's like World War I. And he came back to Lviv, and he invited his family and friends to the Lviv Opera House, that built in the late 1800s, a beautiful building. Everyone dressed up. He put on a tuxedo, and he went to the opera. And now he's on his way back to the trenches. So we see this, as always, this mixture of life and death here. But I would say everyone is holding on and hoping that something changes in the West, that the long-range weapons will somehow get here one day.
We hope. And to close off on a lighter note, Joseph, heard from one of our listeners who watched the movie about your old boss, The Loudest Voice, the story of Roger Ailes, and Joseph Lindsley is portrayed in that movie. And this text asks, is it true about Joseph Lindsley's sister as shown in that movie? That was the dinner scene, wasn't it?
Yeah, so there's a scene where the actress playing my sister, she's invited to dinner with Roger Ailes, played by Russell Crowe and family, and she's challenging him. And she did. She had an internship at Fox, and she saw everything for what it was, and she began to ask questions. She said, how come, is it okay to lie in your marketing? She saw a lot of sort of dishonorable things. The only thing, though, Hollywood got my sister. I have two sisters, and they put the wrong sister in there, which made my sister Kathleen very happy. She was the one who got portrayed by an actress, and my sister Laura, who it really was, wasn't mentioned. So Hollywood failed to fact check, which they should have in a movie about the truth. But
that's Hollywood. Yeah, if you could find it, it's streaming at different channels. The Loudest Voice. Joseph will check in with you tomorrow. Thank you, as always.
Don't believe it all until tomorrow. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал? Well, which side are you on? На чьей ты стороне? Come on now. Oh, which side are you on? На чьей ты стороне?